Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast, the podcast that is passing wisdom to the next generation of athletes, coaches, and parents to transform leaders on and off the court. And in today's episode, we are interviewing the author of Impactology, Dylan Kurt. In our episode today, we interview Dylan, who shares the secrets and wisdom about how he went from losing a state championship to then getting in the gym, learning how to impact the game on and off the court, and then winning a state championship. He shares so much good wisdom that are great for coaches, great to pass on to athletes, and also great for the parents. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, Dylan, and welcome to the Bridging Impact Podcast. I'm thrilled to have you on. It's great to have another PGC connection on the podcast. So welcome to the show.
Justin, thanks for having me.
You got it. Let's dive right in. We always start with an easy softball question of how has the game of basketball made an impact on your life?
That's a good question. I've had throughout the 4 years of my high school playing, and I will say, being successful definitely helps. But I've just created so many memories, and looking back now that it's over, it's just fun. It was a fun time of my life that I will always cherish. And not only was it a source of fun and happiness, but also one of growth. I grew a lot throughout that time, both as a person, as a basketball player. And it's just kind of cool to look back. And obviously the memories come with relationships too. I still keep in touch with my high school friends and former teammates and coaches. We're actually this weekend going with my high school coach to Chicago to see another buddy from high school. So, those bonds that you build throughout that. But yeah.
That's what makes it so meaningful and rewarding. And with that, I want to kind of touch on the growth piece of it. And so I want to talk about, when you entered high school as a freshman and from when you left high school as a senior, what do you think were the three biggest areas of growth that you experienced in your time as a high schooler and also as a high school basketball player?
That's a good question. Three biggest areas of growth. First, I'd say just like understanding that I can grow as a person.
Right.
I always would knock on the self-help. It's kind of funny, but the self-help stuff, my dad would read it and I'd make fun of him for it. And then one day I was like, hey, like I can improve as a person. Like that's kind of an interesting concept. So, I sort of dove into all that and just sort of the concept of growth and understanding that I can better myself. I'd say that's obviously what sort of started it. I'm trying to think what else. The second, something that comes to mind would be growing physically. And I'll talk probably a little bit about this in terms of impact, but I did not. I was a skinny kid, and after I lost my first state championship, it was just like demon mode throughout that entire summer. And, I just, hit the weight so much. And I transformed from the smallest kid on the court to the biggest in that summer. And, just growing in an area that I needed to increase the impact I had on my team. That's something that, stands out. And for a third one, I'm blanking here. It's just there's so many things that I learned, and then also probably just the compound interest of the first concept of growing. I after every game, I would watch the entire film and mark down times of this went well, this didn't, and then at the end I'd reflect what did I learn. And there'd be times like I was trying to learn the back of the press, so what should I go up to steal this ball? And because we were running a run and jump, and I'd do that over and over, and you watch yourself on film, I 26 games a season, and then you do that for 4 years, you're watching yourself so many times, and if you 20 things that you learned from this game, and then it just multiplies. It's insane how much you can learn from that. So I definitely say the compound interest of reflection and growth.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think number one is a big one and really important one, right? Like I just read the book. I reread the book Mindset. I actually first read it when I was in high school, my senior year of baseball, and actually clipped out a quote from a newspaper that was from Mindset, kind of long story short. But with that, it talks about the fix and the growth mindset. And I think it is a really important aspect to learn at a young age, right? When you're in high school, that you can grow. Like you don't have to be the same person. I think a lot of that I learned from PGC at first. And that kind of like sparked me wanting to like learn and read more about mindsets and like how I can grow as a person. But with that, I really want to ask a follow-up question on, the weight room is a big thing that I talk about with my athletes, especially because I feel like there's so much skill now in the game of basketball, but I still feel like weight room wise, like can be a big differentiator. So how did you, make sure you stick to a plan? Did you have a trainer? Like, how did you go about really elevating your game in the weight room from a summer to go from, the smallest kid to the biggest kid?
Yeah. So I would agree. I don't want to say skill is overrated because obviously having skills, especially in basketball,
Right.
It's a sport where skills get rewarded. But I do think it is a little overemphasized in the fact that hitting the weight room can improve your skills tremendously.
Right.
Or working on your mindset can improve your skills tremendously. And it's important, and that's sort of what I talk about in my book. You want to focus on your impact. Now there's layers to it. It's a big picture, and there's different pieces inside of it. Track stats being one, skills being one. But if you focus too much on that, you could miss out on another big opportunity for growth. And like for me, that was the weight room. And once I did that, then I improved in so many different aspects. So identifying your biggest opportunities for growth, that's definitely important. But for how I train, I got to shout out my little brother because Brady, he sort of helped transform me into the beast that I became that summer. Obviously like doing the research, there's a lot of research going into it, different programs, what's the best, and then you sort of find the best, find the stuff that different sites may say, and just like you do those things, and then it's tough because you don't see results right away. So if you're so, and this is another learning, if you're so result oriented, things aren't going to work out. But if you're focusing on the process, good results will come from it. And at first, I'm lifting, it's like I don't see any changes. It's something's not working. And then a month, 2 months, however long, and you're like, okay, like you can start to see those changes. And that's where it's like the process is so important. And just understanding the concept also of increasing your impact through things that aren't necessarily skills too.
Yeah, I think the important thing you talked about there is not attached to outcome, NATO, which is something that, PGC uses all the time. And, I could definitely testify to as athletes and even as, just someone who wants to lift and get stronger still to this day. We want results immediately, right? And especially, this generation of athletes, right? They see you have so much access to so many players and their physicality, right? Which may be natural or maybe worked for, but you never know, right? Because when you're scrolling through Instagram, you just see them. You don't see their entire story behind them. And I think there has to be a layer of compounding work over time. Like you said, like if you want to kind of get stronger in the weight room, right, it's got to be 3-4 times a week consistently. It can't be one day, then 5, then 2, right? It's that consistency over time that then compounds and creates that impact on the game that then does translate to your skills, right? So if I'm, a very skilled guard who's handling the ball, like I'm going to be quicker to the rim if I am in the weight room and I'm just quicker, if I'm stronger. And there's only so much skill I could really be training to get me to kind of blow by a defender quicker. And if I want to be, a big man and want to rebound, right, I have to be strong. I have to be able to, kind of box out and be physical, right? And we can do a bunch of rebounding drills and technique all day, but you can't shortcut the weight room and get stronger there. So I think that's really important for those, that are listening to this right now. It looks like you got something you want to continue to expand on.
Yeah. Yes, I do. Another thing I'd say, so I went through 3 different knee surgeries during my high school career and 1 nose surgery. So I was put through the ringer. And something that, looking back through, the constant reflection, I sort of realized I kind of benefited from that, because in the weight room during the summers, we didn't have it was our basketball coach pretty much. And he would research exercises and would tell us to do those. So it's kind of a free for all a little bit. And I had an injured knee. I had cartilage pieces moving around, and then, all that stuff. But I got to sort of create the workouts that I wanted to do because it was a free for all and because I had knee problems. So I focused on doing the lifts that I enjoyed because that was enjoyable. And then I think it's there's this entrepreneur, Naval Ravikant, who talks about read the books you love until you love to read. And I think you should do the workouts you love until you love to work out. Lifts, specific lifts in particular. And I sort of would do those, and I still do them today. And now once you've built like the habit of the thing, then you can expand on it. But so many people are like, how can I get, as strong as I can, as fast as I can, when you should be, asking what would be the most enjoyable way to do this? And obviously there's a balance between those 2 things, but I just want to mention that for people who may be struggling to stay consistent in the weight room. Like, you don't have to torture yourself to succeed. You can have fun and build muscle. It doesn't have to be an either or.
That's a really good point. And I think it's a really good point to just enjoy the process because, at the end of the day, like we were kind of talking about before we got on, both of us are both retired players, right? I'd love to continue to play, right? Obviously. And so maximizing that potential by, obviously being in the weight room, but maximizing experience too. Like you also mentioned, when you talked about impact, it's about the people that you're around. So it's about training with the people, having fun and enjoying the process. Of course, there's a balance. It's not going to be playing duck, duck, goose all day in the weight room and fun like that. But fun in terms of, we're laughing, joyous, helping each other improve and pushing each other. And I think one of the things I want to continue to expand and learn about is from your book, Dear Hooper, Why Stats Don't Tell the Whole Story and What to Do About It. Because I think as we kind of transition to this part of our conversation, obviously stats have become a huge part of all sports. Like, I'm a baseball fan and analytics are everything in baseball, but they're definitely really, obviously taken over in basketball as well. And we become like, I even work with, really young athletes. I coached a 10U club team, this spring and the early summer. And a lot of my players, at 7 years old, I did not care what my points per game was, what my rebounds per game was. But now this generation, because that's what is rewarded, right? It's what's rewarded online, right? I scored 36 and I had 15 rebounds and I had 12 assists, just wanting to stat pad. And your book talks about how stats don't tell the whole story. So can you elaborate on, before we even get into the content, why you wanted to write the book?
Yeah. I wanted to write the book, and initially because I felt that I had some things worth sharing to other athletes. Originally, it was going to be a success guide for athletes and then a success guide for parents. And then there ended up being much more stuff for the athletes because I'm not a parent yet. But I just, it's something I had struggled with, and it ended up being the book that I wanted to read, but there was nothing out there for me. So then I had to write it myself, and I'm glad I did because I learned so much throughout that process of writing and also diving into the concepts and why do I care so much about my stats? Why am I crying about it and stuff like that? And, I just learned a lot through that process, and yeah.
Let's break it down. What in the book, give a little synopsis without giving it away, because we'll plug the book later here in the podcast. But what are some of the key principles that you teach and share in the book?
Yeah. So the main premise is that stats don't tell the whole story, or the stat book is not reality. And that you do things we'll talk about basketball. Those are the examples you use, but it applies to all sports in life. There are things that you do to help your team that don't get tracked. That's just the reality of it. And too many athletes think that their statistics determine their impact. But if you always think that, then you're going to, neglect everything that you do outside of those statistics to help your team win. So a couple examples of how the stat book doesn't track everything. So if I tip the ball to you, you get a steal. If I run the length of the court to create a 2-on-1 for our team, you and me, then that doesn't get tracked unless you pass it to me and I score. But tipping the ball and running to create an advantage for your team, even if you don't get past the ball, you should still be happy that you had an impact on your team. Not that, I didn't get the steal. I didn't get the 2 points. It's focusing on the impact that you have and not the recognition you get. The recognition you get is, the media and the stuff tracked in the stat book. But the impact that you have, that's the untracked stuff and the stuff that's tracked, in the stat book. So it's sort of built off that premise that it can't track everything, and its purpose wasn't to track everything. So I encourage athletes to understand that, and the more you understand that, the more you can focus on your entire impact and everything that you do. I just created a video, super cool example of making an impact that's not tracked. There's an NHL manager. I'm not sure if you saw this on Bleacher Report, but guy broke his stick, and this manager knew that he broke the stick before the player did. So he sprinted over to the other side of the bench, handed it to him. That guy ends up, like 5 seconds later, assisting. And this is the World Cup, or I'm not sure if World Cup is the correct term for NHL. Stanley Cup, that's what it is. But it's just so cool because impact knows no boundaries. You can impact in the stat book, outside of the stat book, in the game, outside of the game. And so the first concept is that the stat book is not reality. And with that being said, I encourage athletes to pour their entire being into maximizing the impact that they have on their team, whether it's tracked, whether it's untracked, whether it's in the game or beyond.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think, honestly, coaches can have a big pivotal role in that as well, and what they emphasize. And before we kind of dive into, the coach's role to it, can you share some, different leadership qualities or, different stories around impact beyond the stat book, similar to the NHL Cup the Stanley Cup manager, going and doing that. But what are some things, daily things players can do for their teammates that can impact the game on or off the court?
It's a good question. Yeah, there's a couple things. So I think one anybody can do is bring energy and have a good attitude. It isn't dependent on whether you're playing. It isn't dependent on whether you have the ball in your hands. It doesn't matter if you're a player. You can be a manager, you can be a coach, it's impact knows no boundaries, and you can bring positive energy, a positive attitude wherever, whenever you are. So I'd say that. And then another thing I talk about are the 5 qualities of a good teammate. And then to sum it all up, it's like the golden rule of being a teammate: be the teammate that you want to play with. Does the teammate that you want to play with, do they care about their personal statistics more than the team success? Probably not. So I encourage athletes to do that. High fives. I mean, I have this framework. It's a 4-square, and then there's tracked impact and untracked impact, and then it goes low to high, low to high. So a low tracked and low untracked impact would be Slacker Steve. He doesn't do much. He has a lot of room to grow. And then if we go to high tracked impact and low untracked impact, that's Statsman Stan. That's who I was 7th, 8th grade year. I put in the skill work to succeed, but my impact does not leave the stat book. So it's the kid 7th, 8th grade who can, dribble, shoot, assist others, but they haven't grown their impact throughout throughout not being in the stat book. And then you have the flip side of that is intangible Ike. He's high untracked impact and low tracked impact. And he doesn't put much work in outside of practice. So it's sort of the opposite of Statsman Stan, but he does the dirty work. He boxes out whether he gets the rebound or not. You know, he's preventing points, and preventing can be as good as doing. So if you score 20 points but you give up 22, then that's like -2 for your team. But if you're intangible Ike, you're shutting down the other team's best player, you're not scoring any. It could be a +15. He's doing that stuff. And then you have all around Adam, which I encourage everyone to strive to be. He does the stuff intangible Ike does, the good stuff, and the good stuff Statsman Stan does. I don't know if that answers your question. I went on a little bit of a rant there.
No, that's perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping, is to kind of break down the 4 different players that are kind of, in general, make up a team. And a lot of times, some players will fall into, both categories. They may not just fit one, right? And so there's some nuance, but I think that's a really good kind of visual description for, the coaches and parents and even the athletes that are listening to this, and to understand, what should my role be? And so for me as a coach, right, I think, obviously just coming off of a PGC experience, you talked about, number one, like energy and attitude being incredibly important, right? I just remember my director, Dan Decker, who I had on the podcast, a couple months ago, he talked about how energy raises human performance, right? So that's something that we all can always bring, right? That's genuine to us, whether we're, a vocal person or we're kind of just a clap, high five, like bring good energy type of person, right? Really, really depends on people's personality. At the same time, I think it's so important to make sure that as coaches, we have conversations with our athletes who just are stat stuffers. And so in the book, or from your experiences, what, conversations should coaches be having with athletes who are Statsman Stan?
Yeah, great question. So my initial thought is, if coaches talk about and praise the highlight plays, the stuff in the stat book, you're going to produce Statman Stans. So I'm sort of going back even further. And on the flip side of that, if you talk about impact, the little things, and how if you're a coach and you talk about that stuff, it's going to become an attractive thing to do for your players. And for my high school, we talked about the little things. The little things were always preached. So then it was, okay, I'm stepping over for help, stuff like that. That it's making an impact. It's not tracked. And there's so many little things. It's impossible to track all of them. But for the coach who's dealing with a statsman, it's sort of bad terminology, who's handling, talking with, conversing with a statsman Stan, I'd encourage them to show statsman Stan the stuff that they are doing, even if it's a little, that is impacting the game that's not being tracked. And then I'd also show them your teammates, like if going back to the 2-on-1 example, let's say your statsman Stan and you had scored the layup off the tip, you're showing that player, look, this player helped you out by running the length of the court. It made it easier for you to score. Yes, you did a great job attacking him and finishing in transition, but you have to recognize that this player made an impact for you and the team, and it wasn't tracked. And sort of just showing them and encouraging them to focus on their impact outside of the stat book, it will really open up their eyes to what they can do and what the potential would be if they focused on their entire impact.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really good. Like, right, you have, number one, you have to model it, but then I think I think sometimes athletes, inherently, like, being an athlete, right? We think about how can we train and improve ourselves? How can I, score more points? How can I get more rebounds? So sometimes inherently being an athlete can sometimes, kind of produce selfish thoughts. So sometimes it's not even necessarily like they are choosing to be selfish. They just haven't had, kind of like what you were talking about at the beginning, where you recognize, oh, I can grow, right? Oh, I can impact the game other than my stats, right? Like at the end of the day, like we all want to feel like we belong on a team. And so people want to belong by producing crazy stats. Number one, they want to belong to the team, but they also want to belong in the community of Instagram and TikTok and kind of wherever, they're hanging out and talking, right? And so a lot of that gets rewarded from the highlight plays. But what's most important, I feel like, is those relationships. If they feel like they belong on a team, they'll be able to recognize some of the impact, right? Like high-fiving, bringing energy, running the lane, right? Doing some of the little things, boxing out, even though they don't get the rebound, but their other team's best rebounder doesn't get the rebound. And just some of those little things and helping. I feel like number one is just kind of noticing. And then number two is something I wrote down. I had on a podcast. His name was Stephen Mackey. And he said, what you reward gets repeated. So if you're going to reward, like someone scoring 38 points a game, then you're going to have a bunch of people that are chasing 38 points a game. But if you reward the little things, if you give people praise, because at the end of the day, like, people want to feel validated and like they belong. And especially, this generation that is a lot of external rewards is what they're used to, likes on Instagram, comments, followers. And so if we can kind of give them that external reward, like, hey, nice box out, that'll go really far. And so when you were in the process of writing this book, I'm really curious, as you probably talk to, different coaches or you study different players, what do you think was the most challenging aspect to getting like a Statsman Stan to kind of jump into becoming all around Adam?
Yeah, I think it's their ego. Like you said, they get so caught up in what other people think about them and their external validation. But what I talk about is you focus so much on your impact, you can internally validate what you do, that the external stuff doesn't matter anymore. And for me, because I was a Statsman Stan, and people would ask me, after the tournaments or games on Snapchat or whatever, how to go, how many points did you have? And like, one, that's what the focus is, how many points I had, not how did I impact the game. And two, just it's, you focus on it, it's all you think about. The more you focus on your stats, the more you think about it. And it's hard when that's what your measurement of success is. If it's your points, then obviously you're going to be beating yourself up if you don't reach that. And that's why when you make that flip to my impact's way more important than my points, and my points is simply just a part of that. It's much easier. I had a couple other thoughts before we move on. Yeah, you talked about rewiring self-talk, and you say, like, athletes ask themselves, how can I score more points? How can I get more rebounds? And, I love that, because I did the same thing. How can I score more points? And that's, validating my ego. And so I talk about making the switch of rewiring your self-talk. Ask yourself, how can I make it easier for our team to score? The focus isn't about you. The focus is about the stuff you can do to improve your team and help your team win. And there's two ways you can, help your team make it easier to score. So the stuff you can do right now, and then the stuff you can do to improve on. The stuff you can do right now, that's setting screens, moving on offense. That's those sorts of things, learning the plays. It's the easy stuff, bringing energy. Not easy, but you just have to make the decision to do it. That's the stuff you can do right now. And then the stuff you can improve on to increase your impact exponentially is working on your jumper, the skill work, the going to the weight room, stuff like that. That's the stuff that over time you improve it, and then you become so much better. And then I love that quote, what you reward is what gets repeated. Can't read my own handwriting. There's a couple good examples of that from coaches. Like in football, I've seen videos on ESPN. They do syrup shots for pancake blocks. And, nice. you better believe that team is pancaking people, because, who doesn't want a syrup shot? Just, I don't know if it tastes good, or, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's
fun.
Positive. It's fun, and it's positive reinforcement. And then I know a coach who would do Gatorades. He'd give players Gatorades and a Twitter shout out for charges taken. So you better believe there were a lot of Twitter posts during their basketball season, so those are just a couple thoughts, I guess. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a fun one. I know when I played baseball, so we used to get Snickers if we wore a pitch, if we got hit by the pitch, so I think it's similar aspects of just creating those rewards. with that. And I think honestly, like, it's really simple, but, instead of, for us coaches and parents, when we, talk to our athletes, I think a lot of times, and even the athletes that are listening, like, how did you impact the game? Instead of asking how many points did they score, right? Or how did you play, right? A lot of times I'll ask, how did you play? And then they'll give me the points because that's what they assume I want to hear. And I remember this kid specifically. I'm like, nah, I don't care about the points. How many stops did you have? How many defensive stops? And he's like, oh, I don't know, maybe like 20. And he's like 7 years old, so he doesn't really know. But just trying to get him to rewire. So thinking about our language and how we ask the question, and I think even asking like before a game, right? For our pregame prep. Like, how are we going to impact the game, right? And ask them, so kind of just getting them to rewire some of those thoughts to, think differently, because that's what we want at the end of the day. We want to make sure that we make that impact so that it takes them beyond the game.
Exactly. And I talk a little bit about this, and I sort of have this extra notes section in the back of the book, and it's sort of based off of like atomic clears. He has from going good to great. It's just a bunch of gold nuggets. So I talk about stop asking players, how'd the tournament go? How many points did you have? Start asking, how'd the tournament go? What'd you learn? How'd you impact the game? And keep asking, did you have fun? Did you try your best? Because then you're reinforcing the stuff that matters and not the stuff that doesn't.
Right. And it's so important for us to be intentional about it because, at the same time, right, their friends are, right, it's going to take a little bit of time for us to rewire them, right? Their friend groups are definitely going to be talking about points. Like when I hear, a lot of times when I overhear athletes talking about conversations, and I'm sure you do as well, right? It's like points. And it's like what we talk about a lot when we compare NBA players, right? Like, oh, now LeBron's a GOAT because he's the number one scorer of all time. No more debate, like I'm sure there's still somewhat of a debate. But, with that, I think it's just so important about how we phrase those questions. So as we kind of enter the fourth quarter of our podcast, what are some of the, best ways that you see, athletes reading this and then going back to their teams and doing this? Like, what's some best case scenarios for this upcoming high school season as coaches prepare for summer workouts and fall programming and then the season?
Yeah, I think the best case scenario for any player is focusing on your overall impact. And if you do that and you have a team that does that, I mean, you're going to accomplish things that are just insane. I talk about, focusing on the impact that you have, and you do that. You see the stuff that you do, just like earlier we talked about Saspa and Stan. But you're just going to start to impact the game in ways that you didn't think were like, oh, like I'd go back on those films that I talked about earlier, and it'd be like, oh, I set this screen here. I got this shooter open that, hit the shot. I don't get anything for that, which is fine. It's fine. It doesn't matter. But, I help my team out in this way. And then you just become obsessed. I became so obsessed with everything that I could do to increase the impact on my team. And once I did that, I increased my impact by so much. I prioritized sleep. My 3-point percentage went much higher than what it was because I wasn't going off of 4 hours or 5 hours of sleep anymore. And it's just when you can shift your focus from your track stats, the stuff that your ego wants, to the stuff that really matters for your team, then you will increase your impact so much. And it's not just in the stat book, it's outside of the stat book, it's in the game, it's beyond the game. It's being you want to increase the impact you have on your team. A good way to do that is being a good friend. So you can going to your teammates' sporting events out of season, stuff like that. I mean, there's so many different ways and different mindsets and concepts to understand to increase your impact on your team. And my book is all about giving you all of that. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
I love it. No, 100% does. And so let's go right there. Where can people find the book and purchase it and then learn more about it? And then if they want to continue to connect with you, because, obviously I found you through the Hardwood Hustle podcast. I was like, this is great. I shared it with our varsity coach. He said it was an awesome episode. So I think it's really important to talk about the impact that goes beyond the game besides the stats. And so those are the life lessons that we're going to end up learning from the game of basketball or the game of baseball or whatever game we play, not necessarily how many home runs or how many points we score.
Exactly. So I'll give you 3 things. My Twitter is DylanKurt3, DYLANKURT, the number 3. My newsletter is The Stat Book Is Not Reality. That's thestatbookisnotreality.substack.com. And for the book is going to be published here. I rewrote Dear Hooper, and for those watching, this is an author copy. It's a self-help book for athletes. And it's Dear Hooper, but like version 100. So it's much better than the first one. But that'll be on Amazon here in the next few weeks, and I'll post the link on my Twitter and stuff. Twitter's the best place to go because it has my newsletter link and the book link.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure to promote that as in terms of our newsletter as well. So I'm really excited to kind of share that with our audience because it's so important. I feel like it's even maybe important. It could be a good gift for the parents out there, you know, for any birthdays coming up. We got the holidays coming up in the winter. It's going to be here like this. I know we're recording here in July. The episode will come out here in August. So, and then you know how things go quick. So I really appreciate your time, Dylan. Do you have any like last words of thoughts or wisdom when it comes to, you know, leaving an impact that goes beyond stats and beyond the game?
That's a good question. Focus on the impact that you have and not the recognition you get, and focus on tracked, untracked, in the game and beyond. Pour your entire being into maximize the impact you have on your team. Do that, have that be your goal. And then you'll do all the stuff that we talked about, you know, working in the weight room, you know, increasing your impact through energy, increasing your impact through skill work. You'll do all that stuff. So focus on your impact, grow it, maximize it, and you'll do great things.
I love it. That's a great way to end it. Thank you so much for your time today, Dylan.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.